In January 1902, in a meeting room at the Winchester Repeating Arms Company in New Haven, Connecticut, Thomas Gray Bennett sat across a work table from the most productive firearms designer in American history. The man opposite him had delivered completed gun designs to Winchester for 19 consecutive years. Every rifle the company had introduced during that period bore his ideas in its mechanism. Every shotgun. He had come to New Haven with a new design, a semi-automatic shotgun, the first successful one ever built. And he asked, for the first time in 19 years of partnership, to be paid a royalty on each gun, sold, rather than a flat sum for the patent. Bennett refused. The designer picked up his prototypes, walked out of the building, and never returned. In Herstal, Belgium, a factory manager named Henry Frenay was, at roughly the same moment, supervising production on a pistol line that the same designer had licensed to his company 3 years earlier. That arrangement had already generated 724,550 units sold. Frenay had accepted the royalty terms Bennett had just refused. He would accept them again for the shotgun 6 weeks later. The designer was John Moses Browning. The company Frenay managed, Fabrique Nationale de Herstal, would, within the century, come to hold the Winchester name itself. These two men, Bennett and Frenay, did not disagree about firearms. They disagreed about what a designer was worth. Browning's life had been spent building the answer, and neither of them would outlive the consequences of getting it wrong. John Moses Browning was the son of a gunsmith who had carried his trade west with the Mormon pioneers 3 years before. Jonathan Browning had built a reputation for precision work in Quincy, Illinois, then in Nauvoo, where he made and repaired guns for the early Mormon community at the request of Brigham Young. He stamped the guns he made with the words, "Holiness to the Lord, our preservation." In 1852, he settled in Ogden, established a shop on Washington Avenue, and raised 22 children across 3 marriages. He was a polygamist, a member of the Utah Territorial Assembly from 1853 to 1854, and a machinist of uncommon exactness. He died on June 21, 1879, at the age of 73, leaving his workshop to his sons. John Moses had been working at the Third Vice since before he could name what he was doing. He assembled his first functional firearm from discarded parts at age 13. By the time his father died, he had spent years inside a mechanism that most men only used from the outside. He filed his first patent 6 weeks before Jonathan's death on May 12, 1879. It was granted on October 7th of that year, when Browning was 24. The design was a falling block single-shot rifle. He and his brothers began making it in a brick factory they built themselves on Washington Avenue, the largest gun shop, by contemporary account, between Omaha and the Pacific coast. A Winchester salesman named Andrew McCausland encountered one of these rifles in 1883, paid $15 for it used, and sent it back to New Haven. Thomas Gray Bennett examined it. He boarded a westbound train. The trip from Connecticut to Utah took the better part of a week. Bennett arrived in Ogden in the spring of 1883, walked into the Browning shop, and asked for John. A brother working at a vice looked up and said, "That's him. Third vice down." The deal was concluded in that shop in a matter of hours for $8,000. Winchester records confirm the figure, though at the time circulating accounts put it at $10,000. Bennett had been authorized to pay whatever was necessary. Browning, from his position in the Utah Territory, described it afterward as a very big $8,000. Bennett returned to New Haven. The single shot became the Winchester model, 1885. The arrangement that had produced it, Browning designs every gun, Winchester pays a lump sum and owns the patent outright, would repeat itself 43 more times over the next 19 years. Thomas Gray Bennett was Oliver Winchester's son-in-law, having married Hannah Jane Winchester, the founder's daughter. When Oliver Winchester died in December 1880, and his son William Wirt died of tuberculosis 3 months later, Bennett, already installed as vice president and general manager, became the operational center of the company. He was 56 when the break with Browning came, methodical and conservative, in the way that men who have inherited an institution tend to be. He understood what Browning produced. He also understood that the lump-sum patent structure Winchester owned every design cleanly, with no ongoing obligation, was the foundation on which the company's competitive position rested. He had held to it for 19 years because it had worked for both men without friction. In a 4-year period, from 1884 to 1887 alone, Browning sold 20 newly designed firearms to Winchester. Not all were produced. Winchester bought patents it had no intention of manufacturing simply to prevent competitors from acquiring them. Browning knew this and accepted it. The Model 1886 lever-action rifle, the Model 1887 lever-action shotgun, the Model 1890 pump-action .22 rimfire, the Model 1894, which became the best-selling centerfire rifle in American history, the Model 1897 pump shotgun, still in production when Browning walked out of New Haven. Every rifle and shotgun in the Winchester catalogue between 1883 and 1902 was a Browning design. The arrangement had made Winchester the dominant American sporting arms manufacturer of the century's last 2 decades. What it had not done was make Browning a partner. That distinction did not matter to either man until it did. The fracture had its first signs in 1897, not in 1902. That year, a representative of Fabrique Nationale de Herstal arrived in the United States looking for bicycle designs. FN had diversified into bicycles and needed new models, and encountered a Browning automatic pistol. He brought it back to Liège. FN was a Belgian state armaments manufacturer founded in 1889 to produce Mauser rifles for the Belgian government under a consortium of regional manufacturers. By the late 1890s, it had expanded into commercial production and was looking for new designs to take to market. The arrangement it offered Browning for the pistol was unlike anything Winchester had ever proposed, a royalty of 7% of the retail price on each unit sold. Browning had never received royalties from Winchester or from Colt. He accepted the FN terms with what the Browning family history describes as enthusiastic approval. The FN model, 1899 pistol, entered production that year. Its improved version, the Model 1900, followed. FN sold 724,550 units of the Model 1900 alone. Browning received 7% of 30 francs on each one. The citizens of Herstal, whose livelihoods ran through the factory on the hill above the Meuse River, came to regard him as something close to a civic benefactor. By 1905, the workers on the factory floor had given him a name, Le Maître, the master. He was not known by any comparable title in New Haven. Henry Freinet was FN's general manager in 1902, a practical administrator running a factory that had, in the span of 3 years, transformed from a rifle manufacturer into one of the most commercially dynamic arms producers in Europe, largely on the strength of a single arrangement with a gunsmith from Utah. Freinet knew precisely what Browning's designs were worth per unit, because his factory's accounts showed it in monthly figures. When Browning arrived in Herstal in February 1902, unannounced, carrying the prototypes of his auto-loading shotgun under his arm, Freinet did not ask him to make a case for royalties. The case had already been made by 724,550 pistols. The auto-loading shotgun itself had been 3 years in the making. Browning had filed its patent on May 6, 1899. That same spring, he showed the early concept to Bennett in New Haven. The mechanism operated on long recoil. The barrel and bolt moved rearward together on firing, then separated, ejecting the spent shell and chambering the next. It was the first mechanism of its kind applied to a shotgun. Bennett looked at it and stalled. The design was unproven. It would cut into sales of the Winchester model 1897, itself a Browning design. American consumers, Bennett judged, were unlikely to pay a premium for a semi-automatic action in a shotgun. He neither accepted nor refused. He let the question sit. For nearly 2 years, it sat. Browning continued refining the design. He made 3 separate auto-loading prototypes during this period, progressively eliminating mechanical objections. Bennett continued to delay. In January 1902, Browning travelled to New Haven and forced the question. He named a price. He described it later as a whopping price, one so high there wasn't much chance he'd accept it. And he attached, for the first time, a royalty condition. Winchester had never paid royalties to any designer. Bennett had built his patent strategy on that policy. To break it on the 44th Browning transaction for a design whose market reception was uncertain was a precedent he could not accept. He refused. Browning left. His next stop was Ilion, New York, where Remington Arms was headquartered. He reached Remington's president, Marcellus Hartley, by telephone on January 8, 1902. Hartley, 74 years old and in apparent good health, agreed to meet him that afternoon at the factory. Browning arrived and was asked to wait. An hour passed. The telephone rang in the reception room. Hartley's secretary, George Bingham, took the call, then set the receiver down. His face, Browning later recalled, had gone white. He said, "I have sad news for you, Mr. Browning. Mr. Hartley died of a heart attack a few minutes ago." Hartley had collapsed while attending a board meeting of the American Surety Company at 100 Broadway in New York that afternoon. He was dead before the men sitting with him understood what had happened. The Remington Channel closed before it opened. Browning boarded a ship. He arrived in Herstal in February 1902. He had no appointment. Freinet received him the same day. The prototypes were examined. The mechanism was demonstrated. Within 6 weeks, on March 24, 1902, a contract was signed granting FN exclusive worldwide rights to manufacture and sell the auto-loading shotgun. The terms were royalty-based. The gun went into production that same year. Browning called it his finest achievement. It became known as the Browning Auto 5. FN produced it in Herstal until 1975. Remington produced a licensed variant, the Model 11, from 1905 to 1947. Savage Arms produced another, the Model 720, from 1930 to 1949. The gun remained in continuous production somewhere in the world for 96 years until 1998. More than 3 million were manufactured across all producers. It was the first commercially successful semi-automatic shotgun in history. It entered a category that Winchester, its original intended manufacturer, had declined to enter, and then spent years and considerable engineering expense trying to catch up with. Winchester's response was the Model 1911 semi-automatic shotgun, designed by T.C. Johnson and introduced 9 years after the Auto 5 entered production. Johnson had been tasked with building a semi-automatic shotgun while working around the patents that Winchester itself had filed in Browning's name, legal instruments the company had created to protect designs it had purchased and then chosen not to make. The workaround produced a loading mechanism that required the shooter to push the barrel rearward against the recoil spring to chamber the first round, a procedure shooters found awkward and unreliable. The gun was not a commercial success. The patent protections that had once been Winchester's competitive advantage had become the walls of a room it had locked itself inside. The wider argument, the one between the man who owns the factory and the man who generates what runs through it, played out on a longer timeline than either Bennett or Freinet would witness. Bennett's company entered receivership in 1931, 1 year after his death in New Haven on January 3, 1930. He died at 84, having run the Winchester Repeating Arms Company through its greatest creative period and into its structural decline. The company was purchased by the Western Cartridge Company, which was later absorbed by Olin Corporation. Olin retained the Winchester name. Freinet's factory did not decline. The F.N. Browning relationship deepened after 1902 and did not end with the Auto 5. The 1903 military pistol, the 1910 pocket pistol, the Browning High Power, completed by F.N.'s Dieudonné Saïve after Browning's death, and adopted by dozens of militaries worldwide. The factory in Herstal grew through both world wars, survived occupation, and continued producing designs that had originated in a gunsmith shop in Utah. John Moses Browning died on November 26, 1926, in Herstal, Belgium. He was 71 years old, and he died at his workbench, the same posture in which he had spent his life. He and his son, Val, had been working that day on a new self-loading pistol design. He held 128 patents at the time of his death. He is buried in Ogden, Utah, in the city where his father made guns for a community crossing a continent. The Browning Arms Company was incorporated formally by his surviving family in Ogden in 1927. In 1977, it was acquired by Fabrique Nationale de Herstal, the company that had accepted, in March 1902, the royalty terms Winchester had refused 2 months earlier. In 1991, the F.N. parent group, by then operating under the name Group Herstal, owned by the Walloon Regional Government of Belgium, acquired a license from Olin Corporation to manufacture and market firearms under the Winchester name. The ammunition business and the Winchester name as attached to it remained with Olin. The firearms brand passed to the Belgian group. The F.N. Browning Group today markets 3 brands under one corporate roof: F.N., Browning, and Winchester. The factory in Herstal that accepted Browning's royalty terms in 1902 now holds the name of the company that refused them. There are gunsmiths working today in workshops across the American West who have never heard the names Bennett or Freinet. They discuss, with some regularity, whether a designer should be paid per unit or per patent, whether the value of an idea is captured in the moment of its sale or across the life of its production. They are running the same argument that was settled, in one sense, by the commercial collapse of one company and the ascent of another, and left open in every other sense by the fact that neither outcome has discouraged anyone from having it again. The guns on the benches around them were designed by a man who knew by the end what he was worth. The companies that paid him accordingly are still in business. The ones that did not are a brand name on a license held in Belgium.